Right now on Upfront.
Republican shakeup.
I'm the leader in this race.
Republican Congressman Tom Tiffany making it official, entering the race for governor as Bill Berrien drops out. Tiffany's media blitz, the homecoming rally in northern Wisconsin, were there for it all.
What did the first 24 hours for you look like?
Our new one-on-one and new details from the Berrien camp.
This as the state Democratic Party instantly goes on the attack.
Tariff lover Tom Tiffany is raising your cost of living.
A new ad airing during tonight's Packers game. Democratic Party of Wisconsin Chair Devin Rimmaker is responding to it all. Plus the shakeup on both sides. What does it mean 1 year out? Our panel, Republican Bill McCoshen and Democrat Joseph Pecky, breaking it all down.
And quick reaction.
I also want to make it clear.
Democrats responding to the new Republican election bills unveiled right here last week, including the new reaction from the governor.
This is Upfront with Jaron Jordan and political director Matt Smith.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Another wild week in the race for governor. Congressman Tom Tiffany launching his campaign after weeks of speculation, even conversations with President Trump. This as Republican businessman Bill Berrien dropped out Friday, days after a Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel story revealed Berrien followed several sexually explicit writers online. Berrien telling me after the article he saw no path forward, saying in a statement, "As a result of our politics today, I cannot focus on the issues I know will turn Wisconsin around. I have come to the conclusion I do not have a path to the nomination." He adds, "And to all the GOP members whom I met across the state, I loved your questions and your passion. Keep it up. The energy surrounding Republican ideas is electric going into this critically important election year."
More on the implications ahead. Democrats, though, instantly on the attack, targeting Tom Tiffany, an ad campaign not even 24 hours after his announcement, airing during tonight's Packers game. The state party chairman is standing by to respond to it all, but first, on the campaign trail.
Want a date on it, too?
You betcha, that's official then.
In his hometown congressional district in northern Wisconsin,
we send our support, and we know you're the only guy who can get Wisconsin back on track.
Republican Congressman Tom Tiffany with a homecoming in Wausau. Hours after launching his campaign for governor.
I'm the leader in this race.
Yay!
And you can you tell?
Promising this group of Republican supporters he'll freeze property taxes, fight the nation's culture wars, and raise the tens of millions of dollars needed to compete.
What did the first 24 hours for you look like in this campaign?
It looks awesome. We may well announce numbers in about a week.
How about right now? What happened overnight?
We got people that are making commitments. I mean, I'm driving all over the state of Wisconsin today, and I was talking to people that were making commitments, and I think you're going to see more people climb on board here. I mean, I got to prove myself to people of the state of Wisconsin.
Tiffany joining us in his first TV interview after launching his campaign on the Dan O'Donnell Show. Do you think you're the top Republican now in this primary?
I do believe that I'm the leader at this point, yes. I took a few years to really evaluate, is this the best thing to do? And I asked two questions. One, where can I do the most good for the people of the state of Wisconsin? I believe now it is running for governor. Am I the best candidate? And I believe that I am the best candidate to provide the leadership that the state of Wisconsin needs.
Would you like a primary come August, or would you like the field cleared?
No, I think a primary is a good thing. I mean, you look at my last congressional race I was in, we had a dynamic primary, and it sharpens you. So it's really up to other people what they choose to do. At the end of the day, I'm going to be focused on the general election, what's best for the state of Wisconsin.
When's the last time you talked to President Trump about your bid?
Yeah, I haven't talked to him for probably a month and a half. President's been pretty busy. And but I talked to him after Governor Evers announced that he wasn't going to run. I let the president know that I'm considering running, and wanted to make sure that he knew about that. And but that was about a month and a half ago that we talked.
You told me that he expressed some concerns, or at least his ambition is to maintain Republicans controlling the House. Did he ask you not to run or urge you not to run?
No, not at all. He just said, let me think about all this. But the president is rightfully concerned about holding Congress. I mean, that should be his top priority because he wants to have a productive 4 years. It'd really be unfortunate if he doesn't. But I can tell you, with Tom Tiffany at the top of the ticket, we're going to turn out a lot of people in the 7th Congressional District as well as around the state of Wisconsin. And I've assured the president that we can get this done and win the 7th Congressional District also.
Do you need the president's endorsement to win the primary?
I don't think so, but I mean, that's the president's call. The president's going to make the decision whether he chooses to endorse or not.
Have you asked for it?
I have not asked for his endorsement. Talked to him about the race. Have not asked for the endorsement.
Do you think he will ultimately endorse in the race?
I don't know. I mean, I'm going to stay focused on what I can control. And we're going to be out there visiting people all over the state of Wisconsin, working our butts off and trying to lead this state in the right direction.
Some Republicans have seemed to express some concern about your position or your past positions on abortion and previous support for a ban after 6 weeks. One recently told the Journal Sentinel, ideally you would not want someone with that sort of baggage as the general election candidate in the state that Donald Trump won by the skin of his teeth. Curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think that person who was quoted there probably does not know my position. So I voted for a bill, a 5-month bill, 10 years ago when I was in the state legislature, specifically in the state Senate. That bill is now the law in the state of Wisconsin. You can have an abortion up to 5 months. And I voted for that bill. I stand by my vote for that bill.
20 weeks.
Yep.
You previously supported abortion after 6 weeks. Is that no longer your position? Is that fair to say?
You know, I think there's been some back and forth, like any piece of legislation, that there's various proposals that are put out. But the law now in Wisconsin is you can have an abortion up to 5 months. I voted for that bill in 10 years ago when I was in the state legislature. I stand by that vote, and I'll stand by it as governor.
If the legislature brought you a bill that was less than 20 weeks, would you sign it?
I'd have to evaluate it, but it is not my goal to change anything. I stand by the vote that I cast for 20 weeks, and that is what I will uphold as governor.
Republicans in the legislature this weekend are introducing a new package of election bills targeting Monday processing for cities like Milwaukee, some changes to ballot drop boxes. Broadly, when we talk elections, if you became governor, would you like to keep the Elections Commission as is and the system that's in place?
People want to have election integrity. And for me, I have a very simple principle. It should be easy to vote, but hard to cheat. And some of those bills that have been advanced by the legislature in the past, if they brought them up with a Governor Tiffany, I would sign them into law. I mean, when you look at those referendums that have passed over the last couple of years, the people of the state of Wisconsin want election integrity.
The Elections Commission, what about that body as it exists today?
I'd have to review it. I voted for it back a number of years ago, but there certainly has been some failings there, and it may well it may need to be changed.
With that, let's bring in Devin Remaker, the chair of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. Welcome back to Up Front.
Thanks for having me.
So there's this new ad that went up pretty quickly going after Tom Tiffany. Is he going to be Democrats' biggest threat in this upcoming race?
Well, I think he's the biggest threat to working class Wisconsinites. He is somebody who has supported Donald Trump's agenda, which has included the big awful budget, which has taken health care away from, or will be taking health care away from hundreds of thousands of Wisconsinites, and also his tariffs. And we just launched an ad this week holding him accountable for that, as those tariffs devastate working Wisconsin farmers across the state and also across the country. And we want to make sure every Wisconsinite knows his record.
Is he Democrats' biggest challenge then in the governor's race?
I think he's working class Wisconsinites' biggest challenge in the governor's race. Certainly, he's someone who I think has done a lot of loyal service to Donald Trump instead of the people of Wisconsin, may very well earn his support or endorsement. But ultimately, I think that that's a stark contrast to the Democratic Party. We're going to have a great primary where voters get to weigh in and decide who our nominee is. And I think Tariff Tom's strategy is to earn Donald Trump's endorsement and try to seal the race and deny Wisconsinites even a voice, just like he would if he was elected governor, and bring MAGA Washington, D.C. politics from Washington to Wisconsin.
I was going to ask, what is the party's short-term strategy here? Are we going to see similar ads like this in the near future?
I think we're going to have a very robust, aggressive strategy in partnership with Governor Tony Evers to make sure that not only do we have the support that we need for our nominee next August, but that we hold Republicans like Tom Tiffany accountable for the disastrous policies that have hurt Wisconsinites. We're going to take every opportunity to hold them accountable from now until Election Day. Just because the Democratic Party is neutral in the primary doesn't mean we sit on our hands.
Yeah, let's talk about the Democratic primary. The field continues to grow. Do you anticipate we're going to see more candidates enter the race on the Democratic side?
I wouldn't be surprised to see more folks throw their hat in the ring. I think that this is a time where a lot of individuals are excited. There's a lot of competing visions for leadership and the future of the Democratic Party. And I'm just really thrilled to see so many great candidates, to hear that, there's the potential for more. And I also think that it's just a great opportunity for voters to be able to weigh in on the direction they want to see our party and our country go in the future.
This past week, the party launched a new effort to support whoever the eventual nominee is. What does that look like in real terms when we're talking about money and strategy even?
Absolutely. So we're going to be working in full partnership with Governor Tony Evers to make sure that our nominee is set up for success. The primary is on August 11th next year, which gives us 84 days until the general election. We will know who our nominee is on August 11th, and we will make sure that they have a general election apparatus ready to go that very night.
Do you have any concerns with any candidates in this race as we get ready for primary debates and shifting way to the left, or are you concerned that any candidate in the race could potentially turn off some voters?
I don't have any concern about the candidates that we have in the race right now. I think what we have are competing visions for the future of the Democratic Party, competing visions for the future of our state and our country. I think that certainly there are differences in opinions in what that direction should be, but that is the point of a primary, is to let voters weigh in and decide. And I trust the voters to make the right decision about what they want to see moving forward, and I'm confident they'll be able to make a good one, and we'll have a fantastic nominee on August 11th.
Devin Remiker, the chair of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
We have talked with all the gubernatorial candidates entering the race right here in recent weeks, Democrats and Republicans. You can watch all those interviews right now on the 12 News YouTube page. Just look for the Upfront playlist.
Up next, Bill Berrien drops out, the impact on the Republican primary, plus the growing field for Democrats. Our panel is standing by: Republican Bill McCoshen, Democrat Joe Zepecki. Next.